Emotional intelligence has been a popular topic for decades, actually, and then this author here, Daniel Goleman, released the first edition in 1995, became a bestseller, and then re-released the book in 2020. And the title is Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. So we know that IQ is intelligence quotient, and we're used to IQ tests, and they're not really relied upon much anymore, but they used to be relied upon to measure somebody's intelligence. But all of us have probably experienced in life many times that there can be somebody with a high IQ, but maybe their emotional intelligence is not as high as their IQ. A person can be an intelligent person, successful person by outward measures, but they have a hard time getting along with people. They have a hard time managing their own emotional life. Maybe you've had a boss in the past who maybe had a high IQ, and maybe you would doubt that at times. You're like, I'm not so sure about that. But maybe their EQ was quite low. They just didn't have emotional intelligence, and it's been said people don't leave bad companies, they leave bad bosses. Have you heard that? And maybe you've worked for somebody like that, or maybe somebody in your life. There may be relationships that you're in right now. I dare say you may have had conversations last night, or you may today, with people who seem to lack emotional intelligence. So this is an ongoing reality in our lives, and unlike IQ, which is supposedly fixed throughout life, Daniel Goleman says that emotional intelligence is learned and learnable, that you and I can become more emotionally intelligent if we make that our goal. And so here's what emotional intelligence looks like. We looked at this definition last week when we started with number one. Starts with becoming aware of your own emotions, to become self-aware. How do I feel right now, and why, and when have I felt this way before? And you get in touch with your own emotions. And then, once you're in touch with your own emotions, you can learn to manage your emotions more effectively and motivate yourself with positive emotions. That's what we're going to talk about today, 2 and 3. And then out of that, you can empathize with others. And then, of course, 5 flows directly from empathy, that you can relate to other people in a healthy way. And Goleman said last week that self-awareness is the foundation of emotional intelligence, because if you can't connect with your own heart, you can't connect with anybody else's. So we begin with self-awareness, and then, as we're talking about today, we can manage our emotions and motivate ourselves. And motivation can mean all kinds of things toward a goal that you have, or just how you feel in life in general. The kind of life that you want to have, the kind of person you want to be able to motivate yourself. So let's define those two things right now. Managing your emotions means the ability to regulate your mood, how you feel. There are times that there are physical causes to how we feel. We're connected beings, and so maybe visiting a doctor or a counselor could be helpful. If you feel like you're struggling with regulating your mood, there is medication that can help. If that's necessary or helpful to you, counseling may help. But by managing emotions, we mean the ability to regulate our mood, how we feel. And motivation means that you're able to use your emotions, tap into positive emotion to move you. Motivation is in like a motive motion to move you toward what you want in life. And Goleman calls this the master aptitude, being able to manage your emotions and harness them to help you get where you want to go in life, or to help you be who you want to be, or to help you cope with the kinds of things that we are all coping with now. So this week, I practiced the exercise we talked about last Sunday for self-awareness. You ask, how do I feel right now? Why do I feel that way? And then, when have I felt like this before? And you can have insights like, I feel this way right now. Here's why I feel that way. I felt this way for a long time. You may discover that years ago, something happened in your life that caused you to feel a certain way. And that has been a low-level hum in your life ever since. And it could also be something else that was recent. There could be a season of life that you're in, or some circumstance that has happened. Now, I wrote this sermon before yesterday. Keep that in mind. But as I practiced that exercise this week, how do I feel right now and why, I realized that I was already starting to feel the way I did in late 2016 and late 2020. When we had, I don't think I'm alone. I heard some mm-hms in that. In the last presidential election cycles, I'm starting to feel that low-level hum of anxiety. And I'm a person of faith. I'm I've been able to deal with a lot in my life. I view myself as a strong person. I'm sure that you view yourself as a strong person. But part of self-awareness is being honest, that the anxiety level is increasing in this country. And I'm just starting to feel that way again, as I thought, when have I felt this way before? Well, it's pretty easy. 2016 and 2020. And back in 2020, I realized that I was panic reading the news, trying to keep up with current events. And this little guy right here, these little devices that we carry around with us, I realized that my thumb was just trained to go to Facebook, and then to go to some other news app, and then to go to Twitter at the time, and just thumb through news story after news story and post after post. And it was almost like I thought, the more I scroll through this news and the more informed I am, maybe I can relieve my anxiety. Like the more I scroll and the more I'm up on what's going on, maybe that would relieve my anxiety. Surprise, it didn't help. And then I came across the term doom scrolling. And I instantly realized that's what I was doing. That doom scrolling through the news and social media was my way of trying to cope with the anxiety I felt. That if I was just more informed, if I got some new insight, if I got some new understanding, if I kept up on every current event throughout the day, and then I would feel better. And I learned after I heard the term doom scrolling, no, that's not really going to be helpful. I was trying to manage my emotions and my motivation and stay positive and move forward as a person and what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be, and realize that consuming anxiety-producing news and social media posts all day long is like getting food poisoning and then running right back to the seafood buffet. It's just not a good idea. This is not the way. And so you might feel on edge, or you might feel the blahs right now. And this is, I think, a pretty self-aware congregation. You know the times we're living in, but I bet you a lot of us, if we're honest, we're not quite sure how much it's affecting us. It's probably affecting us more than we think it is. And this self-awareness helped me to be reminded of how I dealt with that before. So doom scrolling isn't going to work, and so we're left with wondering, how do I manage this low-level anxiety? For some, it might feel like a high-level anxiety that we feel. Maybe you feel anger. Maybe you feel disgust if you think back to those inside-out characters we talked about last week. And you're wondering, how do I manage my emotions and stay positively motivated through the fall of 2024? And we're going to talk about that today. But I think every once in a while we could use moments of levity. And so I'm going to show you a movie clip. And I remember going to this movie back when I was in college, with a bunch of guys, and I laughed until I cried. And our maturity level didn't help anything when we saw this movie, but I laughed until I cried. And so Bobby Boucher, played by Adam Sandler, is the water boy of the school football team, and it's revealed he struggles with anger issues and aggression when he attends a class with a professor who looks remarkably like a fried chicken restaurant owner. This is how not to manage your emotions. Let's watch.
Now, is there anyone here that can tell me why most alligators are abnormally aggressive?
I know the answer to this question. Raise your hand.
Anybody? Anyone? Yes or you, sir?
Mama says that alligators are ornery because they got all them teeth but no toothbrush.
Your mama said it. Alligators are ornery because they got all them teeth and no toothbrush. Wow. Anybody else? Yes, sir, you, sir.
Alligators are aggressive because of an enlarged medulla oblongata. It's the sector of the brain which controls aggressive behavior.
That is correct. The medulla oblongata.
But Mama
The
said...
medulla oblongata is where anger, jealousy, and aggression come from. Now, is there anybody here can tell me where happiness comes from?
No.
Anyone?
Oh.
All right. Let's hear what Mama has to say on the subject.
Mama say that happiness is from magic rays of sunshine that come down when you're feeling blue.
Well, folks, Mama's wrong again.
No, Colonel Sanders, you're wrong. Mama's right.
Mama's right. Mama's right. Something wrong with his medulla oblongata.
It's okay to fight back. Coach Klein said I could. Mr. Coach Klein said I could.
Love that. Well, it turns out the medulla oblongata isn't really responsible for aggression, but it is a part of our brains called the amygdala. So what we're going to do, we're going to talk for a few minutes about how our brains process emotions. And it is useful information for us in the fall of 2024. And then what we're going to do is look at some brain hacks. Most come from Daniel Goleman, some from psychology, to how we can manage emotions and stay positively motivated, and look at a scripture, building on the scripture that we looked at last week. So first of all, our brains function like a computer, and you know this, with the parts of the brain responsible for different functions. You probably know that the part of the brain that receives the input of and controls the processing of our emotions is called the amygdala. It's a tiny almond-shaped part of our brain, tiny, and they do mean tiny, and it's about the size of an almond. You see it there in the middle. Amygdala is Latin for almond, actually. And this is some people will call it the reptilian part of our brain. That's not quite true, but it's deep in our brain, and it's associated with fear, motivation, and other emotions, and it's responsible for the fight or flight response when we feel threatened. When we perceive a threat, the amygdala sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus, and it tells the hypothalamus to pump a hormone into our bodies called epinephrine, also known as adrenaline. The heart beats faster, blood pressure rises, breathing becomes rapid. The body releases fat and glucose into the bloodstream to help us to either fight or run as fast as we possibly can. This happens before the logical part of our brain even knows that it's happening. So if you're walking in a crosswalk and you see a car coming at you, you can jump out of the way of that car before your brain even has time to think about what is happening. The amygdala, it's a gift. The amygdala helps us recognize a perceived threat, pumps our bodies full of adrenaline, and then helps us respond to that perceived threat. Now, when we perceive that the danger is ongoing, not just an emergency, but an ongoing danger, our amygdala sends a signal to our pituitary gland, which releases another hormone called cortisol. And that causes our body to stay on high alert until the perceived threat passes. So you have adrenaline in an emergency, and that will subside, but then you have cortisol that can elevate our sense of alertness over an extended amount of time. And then you have the prefrontal cortex that is part of the brain, the part of the brain that is responsible for logical thinking. It can process complex information, helps you to make decisions in complicated situations that take time and critical thinking. The amygdala is black and white, and the prefrontal cortex sees shades of gray. The prefrontal cortex can tell whether the amygdala's response makes sense or not, if the threat is real or not, and what our response should be, but it can't tell that until after the amygdala has already responded, because the amygdala acts faster. And so sometimes the prefrontal cortex has to play catch up. Now, we need both parts of our brain to regulate our emotions and feel motivated in life, even to save our lives at times. If we only had a prefrontal cortex and we were in that crosswalk with the car coming at us, our prefrontal cortex would say something like, that car is careening toward me. And I do think careening is the correct word. Perhaps barreling may be a better choice of words. It's moving at a high rate of speed. Perhaps I should, bam. And that's what would happen if we only had a prefrontal cortex. Now, unfortunately, We know a lot of people who seem to use their amygdala a lot, and we wish they used their prefrontal cortex more, but it does have a hard time sometimes keeping up with the amygdala. So what happens, of course, is that sometimes our amygdala is activated when it doesn't need to be. And Harvard Health writes this. This is an article from just a couple of months ago, April 3rd, 2024. Understanding the stress response, chronic activation of this survival mechanism impairs health. It's the title of the article. Unfortunately, the body can also overreact to stressors that are not life-threatening, such as traffic jams, work pressure, and family difficulties, and lots of other perceived threats. So our amygdala has a difficult time determining what is a real threat and what is a perceived threat, and it fires to the hypothalamus or to the pituitary gland, and we're reliant on our prefrontal cortex to do some retroactive analysis and figure out if that stress response is really warranted or not. And so there are conditions that are caused by an amygdala that is functioning incorrectly. Anxiety disorders, depression, irritability, trouble with memory, difficulty handling emotion, hypervigilance, paranoia. And this can lead to chronic stress. Remember, adrenaline is an instantaneous burst of energy that helps us fight or flight, but high cortisol levels can stay around for a long time. And so people can live with elevated cortisol levels just based on what their amygdala perceives as stressors in their environment, whether they're really life-threatening or not. Stress at work, traffic jams, strained family relationships, other pressures that we feel, anxiety about what's happening in the country. Some of it, yes, is warranted. There are times we may feel a threat that isn't warranted. And elevated cortisol levels increase our appetite. They store fat on our bodies, decrease sleep, put stress on our heart, cause shallow breathing, weight gain, and as well as a host of other physical and emotional difficulties. And that's where many of us live. Let's be honest. There's some percentage of American society that lives with an elevated cortisol level, and at times panics because of the atmosphere that we live in. When there's already this rising tide of anxiety in America because of politics, and then you pile on top of that lots of other stressors that we feel, some that are always common to the human experience no matter when, some that are because of the times that we live in. And that's the way that many of us live, almost enslaved by stressors, anxiety, this amygdala response, and wondering, our prefrontal cortex wonders, struggles to figure out what's a perceived threat, what's not, how do I deal with this, what do I do? I feel helpless at times. How do I deal with what happened yesterday? Well, I'm just one person. What do I do about all this? And we can struggle to deal with these elevated levels. So there are ways not to deal with our emotions, manage our emotions. So Friday night, mind you, my wife Hannah and I got a chance to reconnect after a busy week, and she's already started back to school. The kids go back to school this week here in Arizona. We're on a modified year-round schedule, and so it's back to reality now. And after the boys went to bed, we laid down on the couch and watched some news clips from the week. And we talked about our week, including stressors and good things that happened throughout the week. And we talked about how we're living in this time, again, of increasing anxiety, just like it was 4 years ago and 8 years ago, and the normal stressors of life. We talked about our friends and how they're doing, and people in the church, and how's this person doing, and we have to pray for this person, and then we talked about the news. Will Biden stay in the race? And is there going to be another candidate? And we talked about Project 2025 and what America would look like if that were to become law. And I shared with her that I've had conversations with 4 different people over the past month who are at various stages of trying to figure out how to move out of the country. And so there's this spectrum of responses and people dealing with the times that we live in. And over the course of our conversation, and this, we probably talk for an hour, which is great for as busy as we are. Over the course of our conversation, we moved from recognizing all of these things that are causing stress to what we want to do about it. In our own personal lives, what we can do as a church, what we can do as citizens. We got to vent to each other, we got to share. There was a feeling of like, and now we can talk about what we want to do about it, how we're going to handle this anxiety, how we want to motivate ourselves to use the emotion we feel to create a better world for our kids and make good memories as a family and help build the well and do what we can to make other people's lives better. And just that conversation over the course of 1 hour late Friday night, and I say late, it was probably 9:30. That's late when you're in your 40s. It was so late. Oh, we need to go to bed. Just that 1 hour conversation helped both of us to be more aware of our emotions, helped us to feel like we were managing our emotions better, and we both felt more motivated, even by anxiety, because that some anxiety is warranted, and that can motivate you to take action. We talked and we shared our feelings and our thoughts with each other. That's much better than tackling the professor. It's much better than doom scrolling. Having a conversation, connecting with people, community. I'm thrilled to see you here this morning. I'm thrilled to see those of you who are here online, that you weren't scared away or freaked out by what happened last night. We need each other and we need to come together. And so beginning Sunday, August 4th, we're starting a brand new series of sermons in which we're going to have that same kind of conversation as a church. And wherever you join us, wherever you're watching, whenever you're watching, that we all together can have this conversation that Hannah and I had Friday night about what's going on and what is stressing us and what we can do about it. And so we're starting a new series called United States of Anxiety. And we are certainly living in a time of American anxiety, just like we have 4 years ago and 8 years ago. Nationalism looms in the background. There are leading politicians who use propaganda and divisive rhetoric. There is talk of undermining human rights, weakening the country's institutions, targeting the marginalized, and we wrote this long before yesterday, and inciting violence. And we're unsure of what the future will bring. The anxiety that our country feels is rising, and it is also connected to the anxiety that we feel personally. Financial anxiety, strained relationships that are also a part of this, worries about the future of democracy, worried about freedoms being lost or undermined. And so we're going to talk in this series about these feelings and thoughts we have, and then also what we can do about them. So I have a schedule here. We'll start on August 4th by naming our national anxiety, just putting it out there, talking about what's going on, what are the possibilities, what could happen. We want to be people of faith and as optimistic as possible, but we're going to name it. August 11th, what to do when you feel helpless. If you wonder, what could I do? August 18th, finding the root cause of your anxiety. Of course, we all have these national things going on, but you have your own personal struggles, as do I. So how do we find the root cause of that? Then August 25th, how to address your financial anxiety. We have some of our guest speakers here joining us, Jeremy Jernigan that day. Then September 1st, dealing constructively with anxiety over nationalism, sexuality, and culture wars with Alicia Johnston, part of our congregation here. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with a chaplain here in our congregation, coping with anxiety from strained relationships with Carrie Wester. And so we want to invite you to join us starting August 4th for this series where we can all have this conversation. Now, what I want to do is read a scripture, and then we're going to talk about these brain hacks before we bring it to a close. So last week we read the scripture from Galatians 5, the fruit of the Spirit, where the Apostle Paul lists the result of allowing the Spirit of God to live in you and through you: love, joy, peace, and so on. And in that chapter, Paul contrasts the fruit of the Spirit with outward religious rules. Like there are people who say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. Paul might agree with them. Like Paul is saying, yeah, outward religious observance is not going to produce these things, but if you let the Spirit of God live in you and through you, and it's something in your heart, then you can experience love, joy, peace. There's something available that transcends circumstances. And he also contrasts the fruit of the Spirit with what he calls the flesh, which is understood and misinterpreted lots of times, but it's like our own weaknesses, our own passions, our inclinations, sometimes our proclivity to not be able to assess threats accurately, breakdown of community, jealousy, rage, division. He tells the Galatians to walk humbly with one another and serve one another. He says to love your neighbor and be thankful instead of envying each other. And Paul writes this. Here's the fruit of the Spirit, and then what he says right after that. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance or patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. There is no religious law that can produce those things. It comes from the Spirit working in your life. And then Paul says, those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires, often misinterpreted. Verse 25, since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking, and envying each other. So in verse 26, Paul talks about the breakdown of community, becoming conceited, pridefulness, right? Mocking people, provoking, poking the bear, trolling people, trying to get a rise out of people, inciting people, and envying each other. Just being at each other's throats and wanting what the other person has and taking it from other people and just living in that kind of dog-eat-dog world. He paints this picture of the breakdown of community or the breakdown of society. And then in verse 25 says, he contrasts that breakdown by saying this, but since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Let us keep in step with the Spirit. Now, there are people who are going to become conceited and provoke people and incite people and envy people. And it's just this nasty fight. And there are people always tweeting about civil war, and they're always spouting off. There are people like that. But in verse 25, Paul says, since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. And I see an instant connection to emotional intelligence, which almost trivializes it. We're talking about a deep spiritual reality that Paul says is available to people who want to be good people and who want to be open to the Spirit of God. And we can manage, yes, our emotions, but we can allow God's love to fill us up and spill out into other people and to spill out into our city, spill out into our society. And we can motivate ourselves to do good things instead of things that make life harder for all of us. Yes, there are always going to be people who break down community, and they're conceited and provoking and envying one another, and they're at each other's throats, and there's hatred and jealousy that Paul talks about earlier in the passage. But since we live by the Spirit, can I get an amen? Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. So here are some brain hacks in my mind that help us keep in step with the Spirit. Some of this might sound like trivial, like it's not spiritual enough for you. I'm going to suggest today that you and I are whole beings and that we're not disconnected, disembodied souls floating around, or we're not just a body, walking around. But there's more to us than that we are whole beings. And what we do with our physical body affects what our spiritual lives are like and our emotional lives. And so if any of this sounds trivial to you, I would suggest that we're all connected. There is some good news when it comes to the amygdala. There's some good news that just like a computer, it's only as good as what you put into it. We have a saying, we've had it for years, about putting data into a computer. Garbage in, what is it? Garbage out. So the amygdala depends on what you put into it. So here are 5 brain hacks. We're going to start off with one that people might roll their eyes at. And I probably do too from time to time. I don't feel like doing it, but it's true. We're whole human beings. Get exercise and eat a healthy diet. Here's why. When adrenaline and cortisol causes our bodies to store fat and sugar, protecting us from threats, obviously that has an effect on our physical bodies. And when you take control of your physiology, of your appetite, of your habits, and you start moving around, you work some of that cortisol or that adrenaline out of your system, and you burn some of that fat that cortisol has stored. And what you do is you get in there, you're disrupting this loop that the amygdala can throw you into when it's elevating your adrenaline and cortisol levels. And so by getting exercise and eating right, you disrupt that. And so it's a great way and very important way to hack your amygdala and keep in step with the Spirit. Second, and I think you'll start to see, even if you're annoyed by the diet and exercise one, I think you'll start to see the value of these. You find social support. Find social support. And volunteer. Get outside of your own life and serve together. So find social support, and these are coming from Daniel Goleman and the best of psychologists today. Find social support where you can serve together. Where can you find that? Find social support where you could serve together. Can you tell I'm a pastor and I'm just a little bit biased? Find social support where you can serve with other people and volunteer. And you can have those kinds of conversations that Hannah and I had Friday. You can have the kinds of conversations we're going to have in the next series. And it's comforting and relaxing to experience community. When you're able to talk with other people and you experience oneness with other people, those cortisol levels start to fall. Even if we didn't know it's called cortisol. Some of you did, maybe some didn't, but you know what it feels like. And you can just connect with other people, and you can talk, and you know you're not alone, and you can laugh together and share together and identify with each other and encourage each other. There were conversations happening in that lobby out there this morning that were lowering cortisol levels. I heard some of you talking about, oh boy, we're living in wild times, and I know we just got to pray and hope for the best, and well, we're praying in faith, and those cortisol levels were coming down a little bit. Just in the lobby this morning. You may end up getting involved in the political process. Maybe you'll volunteer at a phone bank, making calls. Maybe that's how you'll volunteer. Or you'll talk to people. Maybe you'll go door to door. Maybe you'll volunteer in other ways here. Our serve day is 2 weeks from today, where we're going to cancel the worship service and set up tables in the lobby. And we're donating. Thank you to all of you who have donated. I think all the spots are taken at this point. Can we hear it for the spirit of volunteerism and donating here, and the generosity here? If you still want to donate, you can. You can pick up like large bottles of shampoo or toothpaste. Like these kids are going to keep needing them. They're going to run out. So you can go out and you can still pick things up even if the sign-up genius is full. But we're going to put tables out here. Instead of singing and having a sermon, we're just going to put tables out and we're going to serve and make these hygiene bags for the 50 or so children at Niños de Baja, which is an orphanage in Baja, Mexico. And it's a way of blessing them. We'll take them down to them this fall. And so by donating and blessing these kids, you are doing something that relieves anxiety, not only in their lives, but in your life. When we gather around these tables and we know we're doing something good, and you think about these sweet kids and how they're going to be encouraged. There are people in the United States who love them and who are thinking of them. You're going to realize that, and it just feels good. And your stress level is going to decrease to some extent. And it gets our mind off of our own problems. We're doing something for a vulnerable child in another country. It gets us outside of ourselves. It makes our world bigger. And Goleman says, just getting into social circles and sharing together and volunteering is a way to hack your brain and bring down those levels. And then we're going to park with this one for a couple of minutes, and I have a video I'm going to show you here in a moment. Daniel Goleman talks about essentially tricking your brain into using the prefrontal cortex with mindfulness. This is going to become more and more important for all of us throughout 2024. This is going to become more important. For those who might hear something like this and they think, well, it's just a technique, whatever, I think you do that to your own peril. I think that we're at a place where we really do need to learn how to use mindfulness and the things that Goleman is going to talk about in this video to keep in step with the Spirit. That if it doesn't sound spiritual enough to you, it should, because we are integrated, connected human beings. And so I'm going to show this video. It's about 4 minutes long. We'll wrap the sermon up quickly after that, but this is important stuff that says to me, this is a way from science from psychology that helps me to keep in step with the Spirit. So let's watch.
I think people more often are challenged by handling their negative emotions. And I'll give you 3 methods if you like.
Yes, please.
One is well tested. It's actually used by special forces. It's used all over the place. It's a quick way to go from being upset, it's called sympathetic nervous system arousal, to recovery mode, parasympathetic nervous system arousal. And it's a simple breathing technique where you inhale as long as you can, like a count of 4 at least. Inhale deeply, hold it as long as you can, at least a count of 4, and then you exhale as long as you can. And it turns out if you do that 6 to 9 times, it actually shifts your physiology from being upset to being relaxed. That's one thing you can do on the spot.
Just breathing. That's fascinating.
Another thing you can do on the spot, as I mentioned earlier, is name what's going on. I'm getting anxious now. Or to yourself or to another person. I'm getting angry now. The fact that you can name it suggests that you're shifting the energy from the part of the brain that feels it to the part of the brain that manages it. And the third thing you can do is a mindfulness practice. I don't know if you've talked about mindfulness on your show, Jacob.
I have, yes.
Yeah, but it turns out I did a book recently with Richard Davidson, who's a neuroscientist at the University of Wisconsin, where we reviewed all of the good studies, most sound studies on meditation and mindfulness. And we found that, you know what? It's mind training. It's training the brain. It really works. And if you practice mindfulness, 10 minutes, 20 minutes a day, what it does is strengthen the part of your brain that manages negative emotion so that you are triggered less often. When you're triggered, it's less strong, and you recover more quickly. The actual definition of resilience in cognitive science is how long it takes you to go from the peak of upset back to calm. And the quicker that curve, the more resilient you are. So mindfulness enhances calmness. It's a twofer because the same circuitry helps you focus. It enhances concentration. So I recommend a simple breath meditation. I don't know if you want me to go through the instruction on that.
Please, yes.
But here's what you do. It's really simple. There's no belief system required. It's just simple mind training. And bring your focus to your breath. You can close your eyes, sit up so you're in a relaxed but dignified posture. It helps you stay more attentive. You bring your attention to your breath and stay with the full in-breath and the full out-breath, the space between breaths, and then start with the next breath, the full in-breath, the full out-breath. It's that simple. You just keep your attention on your breath. If there's a place you can feel the sensation or the rise and fall of your belly with each breath. When your mind wanders, and it's going to wander, and you notice it wandered, bring it back to your breath and start again with the next breath. It's that simple. The real action here is when you notice that your mind wandered and you bring it back, because that strengthens the circuitry for staying focused and ignoring distractions.
Techniques that switch the brain activity from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex. And for those who, Christians who think that breathing just doesn't sound spiritual enough or Christian enough, ruach is the Hebrew word in the Old Testament, and pneuma is the Greek word ruach in the Old Testament, pneuma in the New Testament. Ruach and pneuma means spirit, wind, or breath. Every time you read about the Spirit in the Bible, spirit, wind, or breath. Well, which one is it? Same word. Same word. So these techniques are a way of getting out of the amygdala into the prefrontal cortex, giving you a much better chance at staying in step with the Spirit. As we breathe, pneuma, ruach, in and out. And then next to last, Goleman writes about, let your managed emotions motivate you in positive ways. He calls this the master aptitude. I'll skip the quote, Susie, but he gives the example of a college student who is anxious about a calculus test. If they use their anxiety to study more, they have used that emotion to motivate themselves in a positive way. You get that, right? Point made. If they feel anxiety and so they're like, I'm going to go get blasted the night before the test, no, that is not the correct way. So if you use your emotion to motivate you in a positive direction, if the amygdala says jump out of the way of the car, go ahead and do that. You can use your emotion to motivate you in positive ways. And so it may be that, again, some of you feel anxious about what's going on in the country, and you let that anxiety get you to volunteer in some way, to get involved in the political process, to say something, do something, make calls, go door to door, do something about what is happening. And then last, we'll finish with this, to practice gratitude. The breathing exercises don't require a belief system, as Daniel Goleman said, but as those of us who want to follow Jesus and keep in step with the Spirit said, Paul says, don't envy each other, don't be conceited and provoke one another. You want to be thankful. And it's been said that gratitude is perhaps the most positive emotion that we can feel. And so we can practice mindfulness and with our breathing, but also count our blessings. God, thank you for this in my life. Thank you for this in my life. Thank you for this in my life. It may end up being a very long list as we feel gratitude as believers. So I want to close with this story. Every Sunday morning, our road crew shows up here at 8 a.m., and we set up all this equipment. And one morning before serving on road crew, I stopped at a gas station to pick up a cup of coffee. Now, I know I just turned in my hipster card if I'm drinking gas station coffee. I understand. I like all kinds of coffee. But I got up to the cashier and was getting ready to pay for my coffee, and a man came up to the counter from like the drink area, and he was holding a cup in his hand and a red lid in the other hand. And he angrily said to the cashier, "You don't have the right lid." And the cashier was caught off guard and was silent for a moment, and I think the cashier thought the guy was joking. But then he realized he wasn't, and the cashier said, "Well, that's not the right lid. The right lid for that cup is green." And this is why the cashier was stunned. I went back and took a picture of the lid area. So that's why the cashier thought he was joking, I think, that this guy angrily walked up and said, "This is the wrong lid." And somehow missed the, I don't know, 100 or more green lids. The only thing missing is a robot that puts the green lid on for you. And he missed that somehow and was indignant and angry and anxious and complaining to the cashier. And I thought, when we go through life and we don't count our blessings and we don't express gratitude, we are like this guy who missed the 100 green lids right in front of his face. He didn't see them. If we don't count our blessings and see the hundreds of blessings that God has poured out into our lives. I don't want to be like that guy, do you? I want to be able to see what God is doing in my life and what God will do in my life and in our lives, even in anxious time. And I'll close with this. One more photo. I saw this on Facebook about counting your blessings. This is so true. We don't realize how true this is. Someone else is dreaming of the job you hate, the home you complain about, the smile you forget to wear, and the health you take for granted. Don't let difficult times make you forget your blessings. Will you pray with me? Oh God, we thank you for this scripture from the Apostle Paul that describes the kind of life that is available to those who want to follow you, to those who are open to the Spirit of God in their lives. Oh God, we are thankful for this contrast that Paul draws between the breakdown of society, behaviors that lead to destruction, and emotions and behaviors that lead to life and and goodness. He says, don't be conceited and prideful and think you're superior to others and provoke them and envy them and be jealous of them and hate them. We don't have to live like that. Paul says, since we have the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Let us keep in step. And the way we keep in step looks like the way we manage our emotions that lead to our behavior, the way we motivate ourselves. We allow that emotion to motivate us, and we have a choice, just like the country does, which way we will be motivated. We want to be people who are motivated or moved by the Spirit of God. And the fruit of that is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, oh God, gentleness, and self-control. Exactly what our country needs at this crucial moment. And oh God, since we are people of the Spirit, we pray that we would keep in step with the Spirit. And everybody said,